Now, as I mentioned, many NATO allies are against the use of cluster bombs, and Canada is one of them. CBC's Albert de la Talla is tracking that angle for us, and he joins us from our newsroom. Albert, what is Ottawa's response to Joe Biden's decision?
Hi, Stephanie. The federal government is reiterating that it doesn't support the use of cluster munitions on civilians without necessarily directly criticizing the U.S. Canada is among more than 100 countries that have signed on to the Convention on Cluster Munitions. In fact, 2/3 of NATO countries are signatories. The government told CBC News in a statement that Canada's long-standing position on cluster munitions is clear. It said Canada championed the adoption of the Convention on the Explosive Weapons. It added it's committed to putting an end to the effects of cluster munitions on civilians, particularly on children. As well, it said Canada is fully compliant with the Convention and takes its obligations seriously to encourage its universal adoption. Canada ratified the Convention on Cluster Munitions in 2015. That was under Prime Minister Stephen Harper's government. The Canadian military then destroyed its stockpile. The government also highlighted the work of Lloyd Axworthy. He played a big role in the 1997 treaty to ban landmines and served as Foreign Affairs Minister under Jean Chrétien. Axworthy spoke with CBC News Network last night, calling the move by the U.S. hypocritical.
I think this is a statement by the United States which could be very divisive in terms of the NATO alliance, in terms of countries that have come together because we believe in the values that we're fighting for, which are humane and protect civilians. And the use of cluster munitions are a total and complete antithesis to that. It's not what they do, they destroy civilians.
Axworthy is calling on Canada and other signatories to push the U.S. to change course at the NATO summit in Lithuania next week. Last hour, we heard from Andrew Rasulis. He is a fellow with the Canadian Global Affairs Institute and a retired Department of National Defense official. He questioned whether Canada would bring this up at the summit.
I would be surprised if the Prime Minister or other like-minded countries made public statements at such a critical point in time of the war. And it's also very delicate because the primary political issue in front of the alliance at the NATO summit in Vilnius will be the future accession of Ukraine to NATO. And so this doesn't augur well, this political decision on munitions or cluster munitions to Ukraine at the time when they're looking at trying to get into NATO, where the majority of NATO countries are opposed to these weapons.
We've also heard from Mines Action Canada, which is a member of the Cluster Munitions Coalition. It said it's concerned by the decision, saying the humanitarian harm caused by cluster munitions is undeniable. It said it continued the experience of other militaries also shows that cluster munitions pose a threat to Ukrainian soldiers who will be forced to advance their territory contaminated by the failed submunitions. So, of course, we'll be following that NATO summit next week as well to see what, if any, role all of this has. Stephanie.
Okay, CBC's Albert de la Talla in our Toronto newsroom. Thanks, Albert.
You're welcome.